I was thinking I'm going to contact Musi about the jammed up pickups in the front, and I want to take a look inside the cavity here because there's a funny thing going on with the pots. I'm just got to check. Yeah, I was correct. They're both A500s, and that should be really a B. I'm going to have to fix that. I don't like A's, and I don't like the way it operates. At least it gives me something else to do on this guitar. There is running water in the background in my sump pump, so just ignore it. So I've decided I'm going to go with the 2-volume configuration for the Musi Fusion guitar, Galaxy Black. And I'm going to put resistors in the splits so that they don't go as flat as they currently do. I looked this up, and on the Amazon website they say the body is full mahogany and the pickups are called Andromeda bridge and neck. So it's a Musi design, or somebody is making it for them. They call them Andromeda. The bridge measures 887 to 9 depending on where the volume is, and the neck is measuring 823K. So I wouldn't want the bridge to go any lower than possibly 5, somewhere between 5 and 6. And the neck, when it was split at 4, the way it is now, it wasn't that bad. So I may or may not put a resistor in with the neck. I found the neck a little overly warm in full mode, but in the split it was not that bad. If it was maybe also a 5, it would probably be just slightly better, retain some of the warmth and not drop so far. So I'll have to see what that's going to turn out like. I'll do some testing with the split mode. So I'm going to be putting in 2 push-pull pots. They're both going to be B500s. Going to be rewired as per my drawing. They've used the cloth pushback wire in here, which is a nice touch. You really don't see any budget guitars using cloth pushback wire. I will likely reuse that. And everything that I need is here, except for the 2 new switches and pots, and whichever resistors I'm going to choose. So for the moment I need to unsolder the way it is now and get those out. Right, so for the meantime I need to just turn on my little soldering iron, turn it on over there. And if it won't do what I want it to do, I have a hammer to beat it into submission. I'm using filtered water for my sponge because when I got this Merece, M-E-R-E-C-E, Merece, the information said do not use regular tap water, bad for the tip. Alright, so we're not using regular tap water. And to work up close, down in here, yes, I have to take them off. So this one is in the back, so the gray is the bridge, the black is the neck, also by the position and the where it's wired. Okay, good. I may enlist the help of robot while I'm doing this, just to help me out. Trying to unsolder some of these things. It's just the angle, you know, the way it is. Try to pull it up without damaging anything, like that. See if Roby can hold on to that for me. The solder is a dark, well, an unshiny gray color, and typically, all the years I worked in the industry, a good solder connection was always a shiny solder connection, to make sure it wasn't going to be what they call cold solder, which eventually would cause a problem and not. Let's see if it'll melt without adding any extra. Sometimes you just have to add a tiny little bit more there to get it to come off. And once you've got a little bit on your tip, I'm thinking of putting out a little tutorial explanation on Fralin resistor and how to do it with this. I know my buddy Jay wants to experiment with it as well. So on this pot, what they've done, you see, is that they've taken a wire and they run it along the side of the pot and they put it right across the center contact. So on this, what happens is that when it's down, these sets of contacts on the bottom are connected to each other in tandem. When you pull it up, then it goes between the middle and the upper set of contacts in tandem. So what they did is they brought the center tap wires up to here, so that when you pull it up, you send it to ground and you cut one coil off completely. It was a 22 cap in here as well, as I guessed. And what you do instead of that is, between ground and the center contact, you install a resistor which allows that second half of coil to be lifted from ground by a value of voltage, which depends on what the pickup can put out, a little bit higher than zero. So when you keep it higher than zero, the second coil is not completely shut down, because it's not going directly to ground, it's going through a resistor. So that creates what we call a voltage divider. Some of the voltage that's on that second coil that's being produced when you hit a string stays in the coil, because the voltage stays at the potential above the resistor before the ground. So this would be zero, and this is a potential above zero, and the coil produces a voltage which then is usable on the second half. That's how a Fralin resistor works. And depending on the pickups, you cannot just say, well, it's this value, so use a resistor such and such. It could be close to that, but sometimes the characteristics of the coil, even though you know the resistance of the coil, the inductance and the impedance and the reactance of the coil are possibly different depending on how the winding structure was. So although you can't specifically say an 8K needs a 2.7 or a 2.2 or a 1K resistor, it's probably going to be somewhere in that range, and you can have some of those available and try it and choose which one you want. When I'm preparing my push-pull pots, I always make sure that the ground tab, which is this one on the back up here, is scarfed, so that the solder will adhere nicely to it, you take off the anodizing surface, the chrome, and you'll get a much better, faster solder contact there. All the other contacts are basically, you know, a white metal tin type of stuff, and it all takes solder very well. There's no anodizing or contact or chrome or any surface on them like there is on the body. Even if you're doing it on a regular pot, it's always good to take an X-Acto knife and scratch an area of the chrome, you know, all the shiny stuff. Make sure it gets down to below that, and then you'll be able to solder much better to it. So I have to prepare these two pots to become volume controls. And in this particular case, I only have to do one thing, which is to install a jumper from lug 3. I call this 1, 2, 3. I count them this way. When you're looking at it like that, it's the same as looking at it on the drawing, so it's easy to follow. Right? So when you're making it a volume control that are independent like I like them, and even when they're not, you can still wire it this way. But to be independent, the output from the pickup goes into number 2, comes out on number 1, and goes to the switch. The switch. And same with the other one, in on 2, out on 1, to the switch, where it's supposed to go. So this would be the neck input, this would be the bridge input, and depending on where you put the slider, you send output to the jack. What they normally do is they send the output here, and then they send it to the volume, and then they send it out to the jack. But this is a lot simpler. It achieves the same goal of having volume controls in both positions, but in the center position you can blend, and you can adjust each one for how much output you want. And if you can split them, you can also split and use a half a coil and adjust that as well. So I prefer this type of functionality over the standard, you know, run-of-the-mill stuff. And that's what we're going to do on this one. And I am again going to use this copper shielding tape as a common ground between the two pots, so we don't have to run those extra wires. And just put that on the inside of the cavity between the two holes where the pots will be inserted. So that when they go through the holes, they are connected. Think of it as a partial shielding, which is now called a common ground. Now, I've stopped shielding guitars, especially humbuckers, because there's really no need. This is a pure tone style of jack, and this is what I was concerned about for cold solders. See the wires? They're inside the jack and they're loose on both sides. That means that they're not hard connected. These are what's called cold solder joints. Cold solder joints. So when I first looked at the soldering, I thought, not such a good job. Couldn't see this until I pulled it out to find out why I couldn't get the jack out. Turns out that the ground ones, which are the short ones, grab the tip here. As you're pulling it out, it gets caught in there, and you got to pull really hard to get them out. And so I pulled the jack out to see, and I found two cold solder joints that would have been hanging like that for a long time. So I'm going to have to fix this by resoldering it, reflowing that. Just reuse their solder if it reflows until you get a nice warm temperature, hot. And then it should be solid in there like that. Now that's a good solid joint. Let's reflow the other one too. Make sure that the solder melts right into the wire and all over the lug. It should look shiny when you let it go, and then as it cools down it gets a little bit darker or unshiny gray, and then it should be two good solid joints like that. Okay, I can put that back in, and I use these 8-watt resistors. They're very tiny and they fit very easily on the switch to go between the center lug and the ground terminal at the bottom. That and that. A couple of little bends here. You don't have to worry too much about the bottom one being bare, because it's going to ground anyway and there's nothing else for it to touch down there. The upper one, you can get it right in the hole of these tiny little lugs, and that'll hold it in place so that it doesn't be able to move anywhere, like that. And if it touches the bottom lug, it doesn't really matter because it's connected to nothing. And now all I've got to do is tack that on the bottom, and it will be in. Give me some length. Cut off any excess wires. Length, and there. We have a Fralin resistor installed. So now this will drop to only 534 when it's pulled out, and not 4.3, whatever it was before. And that finishes off the first one. Okay, and I'm going to just kind of leave it out in the open like this before I start placing it in. Finish the other side similarly. The jack is already hooked up to the switch and the ground here to get the common, so that will work okay. And when I hook up the other one, the other pot, to this lug over here on the upper part of the switch, I'll do a similar test, because the other pickup is also 8.2K, 8.23, and I'm thinking, okay, maybe I want it to drop to on the neck, maybe also somewhere around 5, so the 1K resistor may work out to be exactly the same value, since both pickups are Andromeda. They're both in the 8K range, and a 1K Fralin should likely give me a similar value of around 5.3 to 5.5. Alright, the rewiring is done. Looking at the cavity, it doesn't look any different from a distance, really, except for the copper back there, than it did before. Wires are in a different place, and we now have Fralin resistors. On the neck I put in a 1.24K, which takes it down to 5.1K from 8.23K, and that works out fine. I think we'll test it and see where it goes from there. And what am I going to do next? It's going to be oh yeah, I'm going to have to do something about these pickups here and put some lubrication in the tuners.